There comes a time in a man's life when every familiar face disappears, when every voice that once offered comfort falls silent, and when the path beneath his feet vanishes into darkness. In that moment he stands alone, stripped of applause, absent of support, unseen by the world. It is here, in the wilderness of solitude, that the greatest revelation begins. For it is not in the crowd that power is born, but in the quiet hour, when a man is left with nothing but his breath, his belief, and his God. This is not a tragedy. It is an awakening. For when a man has no one but God, he discovers the truth of his strength. He realizes that faith was never meant to be dependent on others, that the fire inside him can burn brighter than any light from outside. No longer distracted by opinions, no longer dependent on approval, he taps into a source far beyond the reach of men. He learns to walk not by sight but by conviction, to act not from fear but from purpose. This is the journey not of survival but of transformation. The man who rises from this place is no longer ordinary. He is guided by vision, disciplined by trust, and armored with divine certainty. He walks through storms with a calm no tempest can shake, and he builds not just a life, but a legacy. For the moment he had no one but God, he found everything he truly needed. There exists a sacred power hidden in the moments when man finds himself alone. Not just alone in a room, but alone in his soul, separated from the distractions of this world, stripped of the noise, the comforts, and the reassurance of human company. This solitude is not a sentence, it is a summons. It is not a curse, it is a calling. For it is in the stillness of divine solitude that the true strength of a man begins to emerge, shaped not by others, but by the silent presence of the infinite. A man who is alone but not abandoned learns quickly that the absence of people does not mean the absence of purpose. He realizes that the most powerful transitions in life occur in the quiet spaces, when the applause has faded, when the support has vanished, and when the only voice he hears is the one inside him, echoing with the whispers of eternal truth. These whispers do not flatter. They do not deceive. They call forth from within a force that had long been sleeping, a force unshaken by opinion, unbroken by hardship, and unfazed by rejection. Many men fear being alone because they have been taught that value comes from validation. They believe that without the affirmation of others, they have nothing. But the wise man, the awakened man, discovers that solitude is the forge where the steel of his character is shaped. When no hand reaches out to pull him forward, he learns to rise by the strength of his own soul. When no voice offers encouragement, he becomes his own inner guide, drawing from a wellspring that was placed within him by something higher than this world. In divine solitude, a man no longer begs the world for direction. He listens inwardly. He prays, not as a last resort, but as his first act of alignment. He no longer chases after fleeting security, but stands grounded in a peace that surpasses the temporary. He realizes that he was never alone in the truest sense. He was simply being invited to walk with the one who created him, who knows his every weakness and yet calls him strong, who sees his every failure and still deems him worthy. Strength found in divine solitude is not aggressive, it is not loud, it is steady, unshakable, and calm. It is the quiet confidence of a man who does not fear the storm because he knows who is in the boat with him. He understands that the greatest breakthroughs are often preceded by the greatest breakings, that before the blessing there is usually a wilderness. And in that wilderness, when every voice goes silent, when every crutch is taken away, the man finally hears the only voice that truly matters. This strength gives him clarity. He stops living to impress and starts living to impact. He no longer wastes energy on fear or doubt, because he has felt the presence of power even in his lowest hour. He knows now that he was never forsaken, that his pain was not pointless, that his trials were not tests of punishment, but tests of preparation. He understands that there is a difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is a feeling, temporary and often based on illusion. But being alone, in divine solitude, is a posture of spiritual training where the soul is refined and the mission is revealed. And when this man returns to the world, because return he will, he does not come back needy, He does not beg for attention. He walks differently. He speaks with purpose. He moves with authority. People sense something in him, even if they cannot explain it. That something is the strength found only in the sacred silence of divine solitude. That something is the power of a man who has stood face to face with his fears, endured the agony of rejection, walked through the valley of shadows, and emerged not weaker, but wiser, stronger, and more certain than ever before. He has become a man who no longer asks for permission to be powerful. He no longer seeks to escape the quiet. He embraces it, because he knows now that every great calling is born in the stillness. Every profound transformation begins when the world fades and heaven draws near. In the world's eyes, he may have seemed abandoned, but in truth, he was being appointed. While others were looking for comfort, he was being molded for purpose. So let it be understood, to be alone does not mean to be lost. To walk without others does not mean you walk without direction. Divine solitude is the birthplace of strength. It is where doubt dies, where clarity rises, and where the man you were always meant to be steps forward, not with noise, but with unstoppable conviction. And that kind of man is never truly alone. For in the deepest solitude he finds his greatest companion, and in that companionship he discovers that he is and always has been more than enough. There is a moment in the journey of every soul where the road becomes narrow and the crowd disappears. You look around and find no one walking beside you. The calls, the messages, the meetings, they all vanish. Isolation sets in, not as punishment, but as preparation. And in this silence, you are not being abandoned. You are being aligned. It is in the lonely places that life begins to whisper truths no crowd could ever teach. This is the sacred transition from isolation to illumination. When man stands alone, he often feels forsaken. The familiar faces are gone, the voices of encouragement have faded, and the systems he depended on no longer hold him up. Panic may come first, confusion next, but soon after, when all the distractions are stripped away, something remarkable happens. In that void, in that stillness, you hear a new voice, not external, not worldly, a voice from within that has always been present, waiting to be noticed. This voice is not loud. It is persistent, steady, and timeless. And as you lean into it, you begin to understand you were never truly alone. You were simply being drawn closer to the one who has walked with you from the very beginning. God becomes visible in your invisible moments. He reveals his strength when your own runs dry. He doesn't show up in the crowd because he doesn't compete for your attention. He waits until your ears are clear of the world's noise, until your heart is desperate enough to be open, until your ego is humbled enough to listen. And when you are finally ready, he doesn't arrive, he reveals. Because he was already there, waiting for you to awaken to his presence. This awakening is illumination. It's the moment you stop searching outside and begin discovering within. You realize that the pain of isolation was never meant to break you. It was meant to break the barriers that kept you from your divine connection. It was not a punishment. It was a gift disguised as emptiness. And the man who accepts this truth stops running. He sits with the silence, embraces the solitude, and begins to hear the wisdom that only divine companionship can provide. With every prayer, every whispered hope in the dark, a new light flickers within. Not the kind that blinds, but the kind that guides. Not the light of comfort, but the light of conviction. This light reveals not just God's presence, but also your purpose. You start to understand that your journey was never about proving something to the world. It was about discovering who you were designed to become. And with God as your ally, fear begins to dissolve. Doubt loses its grip. You no longer crave the crowd's approval because you've been affirmed by something far greater. From this place of illumination, your thoughts begin to shift. You stop asking why you are alone and start asking what you're being shown. You stop complaining about who left and start recognizing who never did. Your strength no longer comes from routines or rituals. It comes from relationship, a divine one. One that is personal, powerful, and permanent. The kind of relationship that doesn't change with circumstances, that doesn't depend on mood or moment. It just is, eternal, unshakable. And when you walk forward from this sacred space, you carry something the world cannot understand. You carry a calm that outlasts storms, a confidence that does not scream, a power that flows quietly, steadily, like a river beneath the surface. People may still leave, circumstances may still shake, but nothing can take away the foundation that's now beneath your feet, because you've moved from depending on others to depending on the one who never fails. God, as your greatest ally, is not a crutch. He is a compass. He does not simply help you survive. He empowers you to thrive. He gives you insight, vision, resilience. You begin to see challenges as classrooms. You stop fearing darkness because you carry light. And every setback, every heartbreak, every lonely night becomes a stepping stone to deeper faith, deeper strength, and deeper purpose. This is not theory, it is transformation. It is the difference between reacting and responding, between drifting and driving, between living on accident and living with authority. You no longer wait for permission to pursue your calling. You walk in it. You no longer beg for peace. You live in it. You are not dependent on outcomes, because your faith is no longer tied to results. It is tied to relationship. So let the world wonder. Let them question how you rise after what broke others. Let them be confused by your clarity, amazed by your strength. You owe them no explanation, because your ally is unseen by them, but known deeply by you. And with that ally by your side, nothing can truly defeat you. From isolation to illumination, you are not the same man. You are refined, empowered, directed, not because you had all the answers, but because you finally asked the right questions. Not because you were surrounded by many, but because you were supported by one. And that one is more than enough. There comes a turning point in every man's journey when the familiar begins to fail him, when the faces he trusted look away, when the voices that once cheered him grow silent, and when the very ground beneath his ambitions begins to shake. In this moment, fear creeps in, subtle at first but quickly overwhelming. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being forgotten. And just when that fear threatens to consume him, he stands at a crossroads. One path leads to despair, to shrinking back into the shadows of self-doubt. The other demands something greater. That path requires faith. Faith over fear is not a slogan. It is a decision, a discipline, a daily choice to rise when everything says fall, to speak when silence feels safer, to believe when there is no proof, and to keep walking when the world turns its back. Fear is the voice of the world. Faith is the voice of God. And when the world walks away, it is often the precise moment God steps closer. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with a quiet assurance that can only be heard by the man who dares to listen beyond the noise. Fear thrives in uncertainty. It feeds on the unknown, the unplanned, the unexpected. But faith is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the mastery of it. It is the conviction that even in the fog there is a path, even in the storm there is a purpose, even in the loss there is a lesson. Faith does not deny reality. It redefines it. It teaches a man to see not with his eyes but with his spirit, not with his logic but with his heart. When the world walks away, the man who chooses faith does not crumble, he builds. He does not retreat, he recalibrates. He does not panic, he prays. He leans into the presence of the one who does not walk away, who does not forsake, who does not flinch at storms or stagger at setbacks. This companionship changes everything. The man may still walk through the valley, but he walks differently. He walks with his head high, his steps steady, and his vision clear, not because the valley is easy, but because he knows who walks with him. This kind of faith gives birth to courage. Not the reckless kind, but the rooted kind. The kind that doesn't need to be seen, doesn't demand applause, and doesn't wait for consensus. It acts on conviction. It builds when others are breaking. It speaks hope when others spread fear. It stays standing when everything around it falls. Because faith is not driven by circumstance. It is driven by truth. It is the truth that you are never outnumbered when God is with you. It is the truth that even if everyone walks away, you are not walking alone. Fear tells you to shrink. Faith tells you to stretch. Fear says hide. Faith says build. Fear says you are not enough. Faith says you are more than capable because your strength is not your own. And in the hardest moments, When bills are due, when doors close, when friends betray, when opportunities vanish, faith whispers, this is not the end. This is the beginning of something greater. Unfaith over fear means stepping out when you cannot see the full staircase. It means planting seeds when the ground looks barren. It means trusting the process when the progress is invisible. It means showing up day after day, not because you feel strong, but because you've decided that quitting is no longer an option. And when fear knocks, you answer not with retreat, but with resolve. The world will always have reasons to fear, reasons wrapped in logic, numbers, statistics, and headlines. But the man who walks with God understands that beyond the surface, beyond the temporary, beyond the noise, there is something unshakable at work. He knows that history's greatest shifts were often born out of isolation, that giants of legacy stood alone before they stood victorious, and that every moment of divine advancement is usually preceded by a test of faith. So he keeps walking, through closed doors, through harsh seasons, through storms and solitude, because he knows that walking with God is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It is not always popular, but it is always powerful. And though the world may label him foolish for believing without seeing, he knows he's already seen more than they ever will, because he has seen what happens when fear is defeated and faith is declared. This is not a man immune to fear. It is a man who refuses to bow to it, who wakes up every morning and makes the same decision. Today I walk in faith. And not because he feels ready, not because he has all the answers, but because he knows who holds his future. And in that knowledge he finds his fire. When the world walks away, let it walk. Let the voices fade. Let the crowds thin out. Because what remains is what matters. What remains is faith. What remains is fire. What remains is the unshakable truth that you were never built for fear. You were built for faith. And when you choose to walk with God, even when the road is narrow, even when the lights are dim, even when the night is long, you will not only survive, you will rise, you will shine, and you will lead others to the light that sustained you when the world turned away. There is a sacred stillness that every man must one day confront, a moment when the voices he once relied upon grow quiet, when the calls stop coming, when the praise fades into memory, and even the noise of his own ambition is drowned by the silence of disappointment, delay, or defeat. This silence, though terrifying at first, is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the moment when the world, with all its distractions and demands, takes its hand off your shoulder, and the hand of something greater rests upon your soul. When the world goes silent, most men panic. They scramble for sound. They look for someone, anyone, to tell them what to do, where to go, and who to be. But the wise man, the man who has learned to look beyond the veil of the visible, does something different. He stops, he listens. And in that pause, he hears something the noise of life had long been drowning out, the voice of God. It is in the silence that truth rises, not the kind of truth that comes from headlines or hashtags, but the truth that flows from the source of life itself. The truth that reminds you that you were created with purpose, that you were formed with strength, and that you are not defined by who is with you, but by who never left you. This voice doesn't yell. It doesn't compete. It doesn't force. It waits patiently until the volume of the world is turned down low enough for it to be heard. And when it speaks with authority, with clarity, and with love so deep it pierces through doubt, fear, and pain. This silence is the proving ground of faith. It is where illusions fall away, and only what's real remains. Your titles, stripped. Your status, irrelevant. Your reputation, meaningless here. What matters is not what you've built in public, but what you've cultivated in private. It is in this place that character is revealed. And it is in this place, when no one is watching and no one is cheering, that the deepest transformation occurs. The man who embraces the silence does not come out weaker, he comes out wiser. For he has heard the instructions of heaven. He has received vision that no committee could design. He has been reminded that his destiny is not attached to applause but to alignment. He walks differently now, not with arrogance, but with authority, not with noise, but with a quiet confidence that only comes from those who have heard God speak. The world may call him mad. They will not understand how he endured what should have crushed him, They will not understand how he kept moving forward when every reason to quit was present. They will not see what sustained him, because what sustained him cannot be seen. It was not money, not followers, not influence. It was the voice of God speaking in the silence, telling him, "Keep going, I'm not finished with you yet." So that is the power of divine silence. It doesn't just whisper comfort, it calls you higher. It does not cater to your feelings, it awakens your fire. It challenges your excuses, it confronts your fears, and it reminds you that you were never walking alone. That in every lonely room, every sleepless night, every tear you wiped in private, you were being drawn closer to a strength far beyond your own. And that strength has a purpose. It does not leave you in silence forever. No, silence is seasonal. It prepares, it strengthens, it cleanses. And when the time is right, when the foundation has been laid, the same God who spoke in the silence will elevate you in the open. But not as the man you were, no, as the man you've become. You see, men who hear God in the silence become immovable. You cannot buy them with applause. You cannot break them with loss. You cannot distract them with noise. For they have learned that everything they need is already within, and everything within was placed there by the one who knew the storms would come. So let the world go silent. Let the phone stop ringing. Let the invitation stop arriving. Because when the world withdraws, the voice that matters most advances. When man turns his back, God turns his face. And in that moment, you are not forsaken. You are being filled with vision, with clarity, with power. There is no greater strength than the strength that comes from knowing you are walking in divine instruction, not suggestion, not assumption, instruction. You move not because it looks good, but because you heard a call. And you rest not because you're tired, but because you were told to be still. And you build not because it's popular, but because you were commanded to begin. When a man comes through that silence, you can see it in his eyes. There's a stillness in him, a depth, a quiet knowing that while others were seeking noise, he found something eternal. He is not impressed by noise anymore. He does not chase attention. He carries peace. He carries fire. He carries favor. This, then, is the paradox. What the world calls emptiness was fullness. What they called delay was design. What they called loneliness was a divine encounter. And when that man stands up and steps back into the world, he is no longer following the world's sound. He's following the voice that spoke when all others went silent. So do not fear the silence. Do not resist it. Lean into it. Sit with it. And listen. For when the world goes silent, it is not the end. It is the beginning of something sacred. And if you dare to stay, to wait, to listen, you will hear what only the brave ever hear. You will hear the voice of God. And that voice will lead you not just to survive, but to soar. There is a point in every man's life when the familiar fails him, when the job is gone, the friendships fade, the family disappoints, and the strength he once boasted of vanishes. Like vapor in the morning sun, the plans collapse, the applause quiets, the safety nets break. He finds himself not just alone, but stripped, naked in spirit, humbled in mind, and vulnerable in a way the world never warned him about. And yet, it is in this very valley of nothingness that something profound begins to stir. For it is here, when all visible support disappears, that the unseen hand reveals itself. This hand is not loud. It does not shake the ground with thunder or light the sky with fire. It does not boast or threaten. It moves silently, strategically, lovingly. And though the man may not see it at first, he begins to feel it. It is the strength that wakes him up when sorrow tells him to stay in bed. It is the peace that settles his heart when logic screams chaos. It is the whisper that says, keep going when everything screams and give up. The man who has everything often mistakes comfort for power, but the man who has nothing is forced to look deeper. And when he does, when his eyes rise above the ruins and toward the heavens, he begins to see that what seemed like loss was divine positioning. That the stripping was not to punish, but to prepare. That the silence was not abandonment, but alignment. This is where transformation begins. Not when you're surrounded by plenty, but when you're grounded in poverty, of ego, of pride, of illusions. Because in that space, the only thing left is truth. And truth, though often quiet, speaks with unmatched clarity. It tells you that your worth was never in your possessions, your power was never in your plans, and your future was never in your hands to begin with. The unseen hand begins to guide you, not with maps, but with moments. A conversation that lifts you, a thought that calms you, a provision that shows up exactly when needed. Not a second too early, never too late, just enough to remind you, you are not alone, you are not forgotten, you are being led. This kind of leadership doesn't always feel like progress. It often looks like stillness, waiting, trusting. But what the world calls delay, heaven calls development. In this season, character is shaped, roots are planted, vision is refined. The man who once rushed now learns to rest, not in laziness, but in deep awareness that not every movement is forward, and not every stillness is stagnation. As the unseen hand continues to work, the man begins to change. He no longer measures his success by the size of his income or the speed of his rise. He begins to measure by peace, by purpose, by obedience to an inner call that cannot be explained but must be followed. He learns to walk by faith, not by forecasts. He understands that what's unseen is not unreal, it is simply sacred. This awareness births resilience, real, unshakable resilience, not the kind built in boardrooms or gyms, but the kind forged in lonely rooms where prayers replace plans and surrender replaces strategy. This man becomes powerful not because of what he owns, but because of what he has survived. He speaks with authority not because of his platform, but because of his process. He does not need to be loud because his very presence speaks. And when others look at him, they may not understand. They'll ask how he made it, how he didn't fall apart, how he found peace in pieces, but he will smile, not in pride, but in quiet confidence, because he knows the truth. When he had nothing, he found everything, not in a thing, not in a system, but in the unseen hand that caught him when he fell, carried him when he crawled, and lifted him when he was ready to rise. This hand does not disappear when the crisis passes. No, it stays. It continues to guide, to hold, to shape. The difference now is that the man recognizes it. He trusts it. He doesn't just lean on it in hard times. He walks with it in all times. His life is no longer divided between spiritual and practical. It is fully integrated. His faith is not an emergency exit. It is his foundation. With the unseen hand guiding him, he builds differently. He leads with humility. He loves without condition. He forgives without delay, because he remembers the place he came from. He remembers what it felt like to have nothing but grace. And that memory becomes his ministry. He becomes a light for others still walking through the valley, still searching for hope, still wondering if anyone sees them. And through him, the unseen hand reaches again, quietly, powerfully, consistently. So if you find yourself with nothing, don't despair. That nothingness is not your end. It is your invitation. It is the place where miracles are born, where destinies are refined, and where the unseen hand begins to write the most important chapter of your life. Do not fear the empty. Do not curse the silence, for it is in this divine quiet that you will hear the only voice that matters. And once you follow it, you will never walk alone again, because when you have nothing and you reach for God, you discover He is everything. So when the world strips you bare and all that once held you crumbles, remember this: you are not forsaken. You are being formed. What looks like the end is often the sacred beginning. The unseen hand that carried you through darkness will never let you fall. Walk forward with faith, not fear. Stand with courage, not complaint. For when you had nothing, you discovered everything, and that everything was not a possession, it was a presence. You are not alone. You are guided, guarded, and grounded. Let the world watch in wonder as you rise, built by brokenness, sustained by grace, led by God.